Hi students, welcome to Shri Damodar Ragoji Memorial School. So today this is for class 7th standard, subject is science. Okay students, we are learning about the topic that is what? Reproduction in plants. Yes. So in last video we have discussed about asexual reproduction. What is reproduction? Okay. So next the types of reproduction, that is sexual and asexual reproduction. And in asexual reproduction we have studied the different mode of that is what a different mode of reproduction. Yes. So in that what we have discussed, in that we have discussed about that the types of different mode of asexual reproduction, that is what vegetative propagation and budding, spore formation. Yes. So these are the some of asexual reproduction that we have discussed in earlier video. Yes. So students, today in this class we will learn about what? That is sexual reproduction. What? Sexual reproduction. Okay. Okay students, see, you have learned the earlier the structure of a flower. Yes. So in class 6 standard you have learned about the structure of flower, and you know that the flowers are the reproductive parts of plants. Yes. So the flowers are the reproductive part of a plant. So students, stamen are the male reproductive part and the pistil is the female reproductive part that you have already studied in class 6 standard. Yes. So we can say that flowers are the reproductive part of the plant, and the part of a flowers that you have learnt in that is stamen and pistil. So these are the what? Reproductive parts of that is flower. Okay. So stamen is the male reproductive part and pistil is the female reproductive part. Okay. So students, flower which have only the stamen or only the pistil, which we are called unisexual flowers. So students, in this this flower we can classify it further into two types. That is one, unisexual flowers and bisexual flowers. So based on this male and reproductive part of the flower, that we can classify it as two types. Yes. First one is what? Unisexual flowers. So what is mean by unisexual flowers? Flowers which have only the stamen. You know that what are stamen? Stamen is the male reproductive part. Okay. So those flowers which have only stamen or only the pistil, either it may be a stamen or it may be a pistil, such a flowers which we are called unisexual flowers. Means in this type of flowers we can see only one type of a reproductive part. Either it may be male reproductive part of a stamen or it may be a female reproductive part of a flower, that we can call it as pistil. Okay. So for example of this unisexual flower is what? Maize, papaya, cucumber. Okay. So these are the some examples of what? Unisexual flowers. So next we goes to another one type of a flower, that is what? Bisexual flowers. So what is mean by bisexual flowers? That is the flowers which have both stamen and pistil, which are called as what? Bisexual flower. Students, in this flower we can see both male reproductive part and female reproductive part. That is both stamen and pistil that we can see in this bisexual flowers. Example you can take, that is rose, mustard. Okay. So these are the some examples of that is bisexual flowers. Okay. So just observe the picture of this structure. Okay, which structure that we can see that is in the diagram. You might have seen that the filament of a stamen. Okay, anther and filament of a stamen. So in this diagram you might be able to see that that is anther and another one is what? Filament. Okay, so what are these anther and filament? So this anther and filament, which we called it as what? The parts of stamen. These are the parts of stamen. Okay, so in this stamen we can able to see one is anther, another one is what? Filament. So this diagram is there, no, this is what we called stamen. So in this stamen, this is what? Filament, and this one is what? Anther. Okay, so this is whole part, that is the yellow color structure you can see here, that is what we called anther, and the below which we can call it as what? Filament. Okay, so this is what the structure of stamen. In this stamen we can see two parts, one is filament and another one is what? Anther. So what are these anther and filament? Students, in anther we can able to see pollen grains. What? We can able to see, that is pollen grains. So what are these pollen grains? The stamen has a filament and anther. The anther which contain pollen grains and which contain the male gamete. We can say male cells. Okay. So the male cells which are present in where? In the pollen grains. Okay. So what are these pollen grains? Pollen grains are the male gametes or male cells. So what about pistil? Students, in this diagram you are seeing that this is what we called pistil. What is this pistil? Pistil is the female reproductive part. Okay, so in pistil we can see four parts. What are those? That is stigma, style, ovule and ovary. So these are the parts of pistil. So in this pistil we can see four parts. Okay, so here in the anther we saw, that is what? Pollen grains. These pollen grains are female, that is male gametes. So where we might to see in this female gametes, female cells, that is in the ovule. Where? In ovule. So here we can see the female gametes or egg we called it, that is we can see in which part of the pistil, that is in ovule. Okay, so now you learned that the male and female reproductive cells of plants. Okay, so what are those? That is stamen and pistil. So in stamen we saw two further parts, that is filament and anther. So in anther we can see the reproductive cells or male gametes. Okay students, so till now you have studied about male and female gametes. Yes, now the actual definition of sexual reproduction, which is based on this male and female gametes. So here is now the sexual reproduction is the male and female gamete fused together to form a zygote. Okay, so you know that in sexual reproduction male and female gamete fuse together form a zygote. Sexual reproduction means which depends on seeds. Yes, so here in sexual reproduction we can see, that is these male and female gametes fused together form a zygote, that is which we called sexual reproduction. So students, here is the structure of reproductive parts of a flower. Okay, so this is what pistil. Okay, this is what stamen. This is male reproductive, this is female reproductive part. Okay, so these are the reproductive parts of a flower. Okay, next is what? Pollination. What is mean by pollination, students? So pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower is called pollination. Again I am telling you that pollen grains are the male reproductive cells, okay, that we can see in where? In anther. Okay, so stigma of the flower, that is called as what? Pollination. Here stigma means what? That is one of the part of pistil. Okay, so students, generally the pollen grains have a tough protective coat which prevents them from drying up. So since the pollen grains are lightweight, so they can be carried by wind or water. Okay, so you know that students, insects visit the flower and carry away pollen grains on their bodies. So students, you might have seen that the small insect to be sit on the flowers. Yes, so when they are sitting, no, at that time the pollen grains which are attached to the their bodies. Okay, so insects which visit the flowers and carry away from pollen grains on their bodies, and some of the pollen land, that is pollen lands on the stigma of a flower of the same kind, that to be transferred from the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. So this process which we are called what? Pollination. So just understand the definition of pollination. It is nothing but what? Transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower, which is called pollination. So in next I'll show you one animation. In that you might be able to you will be able to understand clearly the definition of pollination. Okay, so pollen grains are transferred. How these pollen grains are transferred? These pollen grains are transferred by wind, water or insects. So if pollen grains land on the stigma of the same flower, it is called as self pollination. Students, again this pollination can be classified into two types. One is, that is self pollination, and another one is cross pollination. So what is mean by self pollination? So self pollination means, students, if the pollen grains land on the stigma of the same flower, it is called as what? Self pollination. If pollen grains of one flower lands on the stigma of anther, that is another flower, which is called as what? Cross pollination. Okay, so this is about what? Pollination. Next is what? That is fertilization. Okay, so in this sexual reproduction, you can see that male reproductive cell and female reproductive, that is how pollen grains and ovary to be fused that together and form a zygote. Okay, that is the fusion of male reproductive cells and female reproductive cells and form a zygote. So how these cells to be transferred? By the process of pollination. Okay, so pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the flower. Okay, so what is mean by fertilization here? It is the process of fusion of the male and female gamete and form a zygote, which is called as fertilization. So that is the formation of a zygote, which we are called fertilization. So after the fertilization, that is the zygote develops into an embryo, the ovule, and then develops into the seeds, and the ovary develops into the fruits. So this is what we called that is fertilization. Okay, after the fertilization, the zygote will develop and into an embryo, and the ovule then develop into the seed, and the ovary develops into the fruits. Okay. So next is what? Seed dispersal. Seed dispersal means what? The carrying away of seeds from one place to another place, which is called as what? Seed dispersal. Okay. So seeds are dispersed by how? Wind, water, and okay. So the seed dispersed by wind or light have wings or hairs so that they are easily blown away by wind. For example, students, that is drumstick, maple, sunflower, and oak, etc., which are the examples of seed dispersed by wind or light. So seed dispersed by water have spongy or a fibrous outer cover so that they can float on water. For example, that is coconut. And seed dispersed by animals have spines with hooks so that they can attach to the bodies of animals. Okay, for example, that is what? Xanthium. So this is about seed dispersal. Okay. So students, in nature the same kind of a plants grow at a different places. Yes. So this happens because of the seeds are dispersed to different places. Okay. So sometimes after a walk through a forest or a field or a park, you may have found seeds or fruits sticking to your clothes. So did you try to observe that how these seeds were, that is, clinging to your clothes? That is, what do you think will happen if fall seeds of a plant were to fall at the same place and grow there? So there would be a severe competition for sunlight, water, minerals, and space. So as a result of this, seeds would not grow into healthy plants. So plants benefit by seed dispersal. It prevents the competition between the plant and its own seedling for sunlight. So water and minerals, it also enables the plants to invade new habitats for wider distribution. So seeds and fruits of plants are carried away by wind, water, and animals. Okay, so winged seeds such as those like here the examples I told you, the drumstick and maple. Yes. And seeds of grasses or hair seeds of arc, that is madara. So and hairy fruits of sunflower get blown off with the wind to far away places. So some of the seeds are dispersed by water. So these fruits or seeds usually develop floating ability in the form of spongy or a fibrous outer coat. So as in coconut plant we can see, in coconut tree we can see. So some seeds are dispersed by the animals, especially spiny seeds with hooks which get attached to the bodies of the animals and are carried to distant places. For example, that is xanthium. So some seeds are dispersed when the fruits burst with the sudden jerks. So the seeds are scattered far from the parent plant. So this happens in the case of castor and balsam. Okay, balsam. So this is about what, students? That is the seed dispersal. Okay, so this is your lesson of what? Reproduction in animals complete. Okay, thank you.